Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, ranking the Timberwolves' biggest roster holes. What do the Wolves still need on this roster as currently constructed to take the next step this season? It's all coming next.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. A lot to get to on the show today. I want to really key in on the Timberwolves roster and the construction of it, the potential holes on the roster. This was kind of spurred on by an ESPN article that Kevin Pelton wrote that I'll get into a little bit today, but really I want to go deeper. I don't necessarily agree with what he thinks the Timberwolves' biggest roster hole is. I think it's close, but I'll give my reasons for why I think it's not necessary. Well, I'll explain what Kevin Pelton and ESPN think, and then what I think regarding what the Wolves roster is lacking as of right now. We'll do a couple of Wolves news and notes type things, roster related, G League related toward the end of the show today. So a lot to get to. A big thank you off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. You can also watch on YouTube, and you can watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So the ESPN article, biggest roster holes for all 30 NBA teams. It came out on Friday, and it was really like Kevin Pelton does a great job. This actually really feels just like they were like, hey, Kevin, tell us something that each team needs and give us 2 sentences on each. I mean, some of them, like, it's strange. Like the Warriors one just says official contracts. We know that they're still trying to figure out the Jonathan Kuminga stuff. So like, that's, I guess, just kind of funny. The Thunder just says their new arena, which they are getting, it just won't open until 2028. So they'll have the next 2 seasons or 3 seasons, I guess, at the old arena. So like not even real things. I don't know, but the Wolves one though, what he's got from Minnesota is wing depth, which, like, yeah, that's true. But I think I would have a little bit of a different take on this. So what Kevin Pelton says is, I'll just read what he has about the Wolves. It says, having lost Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the Timberwolves are counting on their recent draft picks to step into larger roles. Terrence Shannon Jr. heads the list after contributing in the conference finals and dominating in the NBA Summer League ahead of 2024 lottery pick Rob Dillingham. Disruptive defender Jalen Clark is also an option. Hard to argue with the overall premise. Yes, the one rotation piece they're missing was wing depth in the shape of the form of Nickeil Alexander-Walker, right? Like the only guy that was in the rotation last year regularly that's gone is Nickeil. So it stands to reason that backfilling that role is the most important thing and the thing that this team needs the most. However, I would argue, I would really take this in a slightly different direction. Actually, let me kind of underline a little bit what Pelton's saying. And I don't know, he did it in a couple of sentences. He wrote like a short paragraph on every team. So it's not like this is a massive article. But to me, obviously the Nickeil role needs to be filled. But if you go a layer deeper, like who else is missing off the roster from last year? It's really just Josh Minott and Luka Garza in terms of guys who at any point last season played some sort of rotation role. Like those guys are gone. Not that Minott was consistently a member of the rotation, but there were stretches back in the fall last year, November-ish, plus or minus, that he was involved a little bit in the rotation, and now he's gone. So he was what, the 10th or 11th guy, I guess you'd say. So that next layer of guys on the roster doesn't even include wings. I mean, beyond Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, and Rob Dillingham, who's a guard, I mean, you get into Joe Ingles, who I guess is technically a wing. He's really a small ball 4 at this point, a point forward 4 in very specific lineups if you need him. And, the Garza role is replaced by some combination of, I guess, nobody. Like they don't have any additional bigs that have backfilled that role. They haven't added anybody else to a standard contract. The two-way guys, Enrique Freeman, like he may get some opportunities. Rocco Zakarski, obviously, I don't think he will. I think he'll be in the G League. But those guys are on two-way deals. And the rookie Jean Beringer, I mean, I guess he's the answer, right? Like he technically is in the Garza role this year at this point, even though he's 19 and extremely raw, barely played basketball for the last few years, or I should say has only played basketball for the last few years. So I would worry a little bit more about that next layer of depth now that Minot's gone too, because at least you knew what he could give you. And now there's just what's next, like what's beyond that. But the bigger issue, I would argue, is the point guard spot. And this is maybe the obvious one. Like we talked about this forever. Like, hey, what do you do with Mike Conley? But not only that, the Nikhil thing, yes, he provided wing depth, but he was also the backup point guard. So we've talked about this plenty on the show, but I think from a national perspective, what's missing here is that it really is lead ball handler depth. Because behind Mike Conley, who may or may not even be a starter at the start of the year, I think he will start the year as a starter for what it's worth. I know we've seen kind of multiple reports on either direction for that over the last few months, but I think he probably starts the year as a starter, and ideally Rob Dillingham takes the bull by the horns and ends up as the starting point guard. But behind Mike Conley, like Anthony Edwards is the only other guy really initiating offense. And last year they could at least have Nikhil do it 10 minutes a game, even if it wasn't his greatest skill set. He was capable of doing it. So not only was he wing depth, but he was also backup point guard depth, kind of by almost automatically by necessity. So that's not really Terrence Shannon Jr.'s game. It's certainly not Jalen Clark's game. And we saw the Wolves trying to get Shannon to do a bit more creating for others in the summer league in Vegas. So that I think goes along with the wing depth. The lack of wing depth would be the lack of lead ball handler depth. And I don't necessarily want to call it point guard depth, because Minnesota's clearly gone away from having a traditional backup point guard. They did not at any point last year, other than, Bones Highland was never sniffed rotation minutes, but he would have been the only other point guard on the roster. And he may be again this year too. They didn't even fill a two-way spot with a point guard. Tristan Newton's not a point guard, and the other two-way slots are bigs, Freeman and Zakarski. So gone are the days of Jordan McLaughlin and Monte Morris and other guys that could play point guard. Minnesota's not apparently worried about that with the way that Tim Connolly puts the roster together for Chris Finch to use. There's a couple of other things I really want to focus in on related to Timberwolves roster holes that I would put ahead of what ESPN did, ahead of just straight wing depth. I want to add a couple of qualifiers to it, a specific type of depth that, yes, involves the wing, but are really elements that are missing on the Wolves roster. And depending on how they fill out the roster and what this thing looks like 6 months from now, as we're talking about gearing up for the playoffs, this is a specific elements and qualities that you'd be looking for in this depth. And yes, it could include different wings, more wings, etc. But that's what I want to key in on next. We'll close the show a little bit later by talking about the end of the roster. We'll talk about the Iowa Wolves and what we know about, what to expect as the Wolves finish filling out the roster for training camp. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure you're ready for kickoff with a new can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Of course, NFL kicked off a week and a half ago now. Is that right? Yeah, a week and a half ago now. Tough one for the Vikings on Sunday night, excuse me. Upcoming on Monday night, we've still got a couple of interesting games. There's actually two games tonight. Tampa at Houston and the Chargers at the Raiders. As of right now, the Texans are favored by 2.5 at home against the Bucs. I don't mind taking the Bucs plus 2.5 for that one. Chargers at Raiders. Chargers are -3. I kind of want to take the Raiders in the points at +3. I think the Raiders offense could be pretty explosive. Explosive's maybe an aggressive word, but maybe a little bit explosive. I don't know. That's what, if I was picking both games, I would take Bucs plus 2.5, and I would take Raiders +3, I guess. I would take the underdogs in both of these games with the spread, of course. Ton of fun to follow along with football, especially when there's just one game going at a time, or in the case of tonight, a couple games at a time. It's a ton of fun to do same game parlays to really lock in on what's going on. You could also follow along with your fantasy team there too. If you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com to place your first $5 bet. Okay. So yes, the Timberwolves lack a bit of wing depth. They lack some lead guard ball handling, primary ball handler depth. But very specifically, there's a couple of elements, and here's how I would rank them that I think are missing. Number one, it's depth, not just straight depth, but depth that is of a veteran known quantity. What do I mean by that? Well, right now, the bench, the rotation, the members of the rotation that are coming off the bench, assuming that Conley's a starter, are Dante DiVincenzo and Naz Reid. And if you want to say Dante's a starter and Conley's coming off the bench, fine. It's Naz and Mike Conley. So you know what those three guys are going to give you. Beyond that, it's completely unknown. We think we know what Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to give the Timberwolves this year, and the Wolves obviously do too, but we don't really know it. The sample size is so small. We really don't know what Rob Dillingham can or can't provide, and we're still pretty unclear with Jalen Clark. Both of those guys had extremely small samples last year. It's pretty likely that Dillingham's a better shooter than he displayed. It's also pretty likely Jalen Clark is not as good of a shooter as he was last year. We don't really know. And that is the problem. It's a little bit weird. It's not quite like what Denver did after they won the title and tore it completely down to the studs in terms of their bench. It just relied on like really young guys that they like Zeke Naji and Christian Brown. And I don't know. There were several guys that they hadn't done it yet. And it doesn't mean they can't do it, but it's the lack of a known quantity. And when you're a team that believes it's a title contender like Minnesota, it's a bit dicey. If Terrence Shannon Jr. is what the Wolves think he is, then they'll be just fine. But the point I'm making is like Nickeil, everybody knew what Nickeil was. For the last 3 years, Nickeil Alexander-Walker was Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and he was going to give you, A+ defense and very good catch and shoot and steady enough backup point guard play, and he was going to play every night. I could tell you what the scouting report is on Terrence Shannon Jr. Like, dude's going to play hard. He's going to run in transition. He's a terror in transition. He's going to dunk on people. He's got unlimited range. He's a volume 3-point shooter. He's going to shoot, 36-ish plus or minus % from deep, just around or slightly below league average. But again, with great range, he'll compete defensively, NBA body, all that stuff. We think we're getting all of this stuff. But how does he play within the confines of a rotation, the rotation of a contender, night in and night out, not just in these short stints, not just, in garbage time, not just, and I know he did play rotation minutes in the regular season. He actually, significant minutes when there were all those injuries in March, and then obviously played a little bit of rotation minutes in the playoffs. But like, again, small sample. We don't really know. We really don't know what to expect from Rod Dillingham. And I would put Jalen Clark probably somewhere in between those two. We know he's a great defender. That's probably not changing. But is the offense something really around 40% 3-point shooting? I mean, he's not going to give you, he's not a point guard. He's not going to give you attacking off the dribble to much success, I don't think. So it hurts a little bit to not have a known quantity. Nickeil was a known quantity. Dante DiVincenzo, Naz Reid, known quantities. Those guys could be a little better or worse than they were last year, but we know the baseline for them. And that's where like adding a Malcolm Brogdon, which we'll talk about here in a minute, that would have been great. He's no longer on the market. He signed with the Knicks. Malik Beasley's still out there. There's a chance the Wolves, or it's been reported the Wolves have reached out to his representation and are interested in Malik Beasley on some level. As we've talked about, Minnesota can offer a little bit more than the vet minimum, which is more than what a couple of other interested parties, which I think one of them was the Knicks, who probably are out of the Beasley market now that they've signed Brogdon. And Beasley's not a point guard, but he'd give you wing depth, and he's a known quantity. He's going to shoot 40+% on three. He's going to not be a good defender, and he's not going to do anything but shoot threes. But he's going to be a good 3-point shooter, and you know exactly what to expect. And there's a benefit to that. There's something to be said for a known quantity. And Minnesota doesn't have that. Now, it's, of course, you blame the second apron. Like, it is what it is. The Wolves aren't the only team that's dealing with this. But that's the advantage to having veterans on your bench, that you know what you're going to get. Like this time last year, I thought Joe Ingles was a known quantity. I thought he was going to come in, be the eighth guy, kind of fill the Kyle Anderson role to an extent. And turns out there wasn't anything left in the tank for Joe Ingles. And he fell out of the rotation within like 2 weeks of the start of the season. And he's back on the roster, but there's no expectation he's a rotation guy, surely. And so, not having that known quantity in the ninth man last year was a bit of a challenge. But now Nikhil's gone, make that an eighth man problem, which we've talked at length about this summer. That's some combination of Jalen Clark. Well, I should say them in order: Terrence Shannon Jr., Rob Dillingham, Jalen Clark. In that order, I think will bear some responsibility for filling in that eighth and then ultimately ninth spot in the rotation. But again, not having a known quantity hurts. My next thing that I would say is shooting. And I know that sounds weird. Minnesota as a team was a top 5 3-point shooting team last year. They were 4th in percentage on Basketball Reference, 5th in attempts per game, 6th in 3-point attempt rate across the NBA. I'm using Basketball Reference for this. But if you look at the individual players, what do we like? Who are the plus 3-point shooters? Well, Anthony Edwards, right? That's an obvious one. And he was just a shade below. He's 39.5%, above 40 for much of the year. And Donte DiVincenzo, who is 39.7%. Both of those guys are 39 to 40% three-point shooter. They're obviously plus 3-point shooters. You could put Mike Conley in that category, but the volume and ultimately the opportunity this year for Mike Conley is a lot less than it is for Anthony DiVincenzo. Like, if you look at minutes played in this Timberwolves rotation this season, I mean, Conley last year was 8th in minutes played per game. So he was essentially in that 8th and final spot, even though he was a starter for 64 of the 82 regular season games. He was playing less minutes than 7 other guys per game. So I would put him on the fringes of this conversation. So what does that leave? Well, the next category I would say is an okay 3-point shooter in the rotation. Naz, a shade under 38%, which I guess is slightly above league average. But Naz has only had like one career season over 40%. He's not a plus 3-point shooter. He's a plus-ish 3-point shooter. And then what are you getting from everybody else? Rudy Gobert is a non-shooter. We don't know about Jalen Clark. I know he's 41%, but it was like 90 attempts. We already talked about Conley. Everybody else, Terrence Shannon Jr. Okay, what did TJ do last year? 35.5%. That's below league average. I think he's probably a little better than that. But as we stated a minute ago, we don't know. Julius Randle, fine, streaky, 34.4% on 4.5 attempts a game. Well below league average. Jaden McDaniels, he's now like 3 years removed from shooting 40% from 3. He was 33%, well below league average last year. And then Rob Dillingham, who I said earlier I think is better than this, but he was 33.8% from 3 last year. He was great at Kentucky. I do think he's a better shooter. But Randle, Dillingham, Jaden, and Shannon all shot below league average from outside the arc. The reason the Wolves are so good as a team was the volume of Anthony Edwards and Donte DiVincenzo, and to a lesser extent Naz Reid, really carried that. But everyone else is an average or worse 3-point shooter. And obviously Gobert's a non-shooter. And Jalen Clark, like I said, we don't know. So real like volume, trustworthy 3-point shooting, you look at the 8 rotation guys, and Anthony DiVincenzo, and you could throw Naz in there, are the only ones that you're like, all right, these guys are plus 3-point shooters. It'd be great to have another one, maybe 2 more. So I would say shooting as a skill, as like a known skill from a known quantity, is something that's a little bit lacking. And then the last thing I would say is big man depth. And I talked about this a little bit in the first segment today, that the departure of Luka Garza, and that's the big one. Obviously, Jesse Edwards is gone. He never played rotation minutes last year, but he was on a 2-way deal. And you're replacing Edwards with a guy who's like 5-6 years younger than Zakarsky. Beranger is on the roster and is like 5-6 years younger than Luka Garza. And I think the Wolves at some point this year are going to give Beranger some rotation minutes. He's a very different player than Luka Garza. And you run into one of these teams that has a more traditional center, or plays bigger, actually, where Garza might not went, the Celtics, right? Teams that rebound well, like that's where Garza was helpful to at least have. You could pull the fire alarm if you needed some additional size in there, a guy that's going to play hard. You don't necessarily have that now. It's third on this list because I think the Wolves are a fine rebounding team as it is. They're a pretty big team overall. Like, they've got big guards and wings. Just don't have a whole lot of true big man size at the 4 and the 5. And that's can be concerning. There's a handful of games a year where it could be helpful to have a bit of a better plan there. but it's not a massive issue. I wouldn't put that on par with the known depth, veteran, wing depth, guard depth, and then also the shooting thing that we just talked about. All right. I want to close by we'll talk briefly about Brogdon. We'll talk about the Iowa Wolves and their new head coach as well. We'll do all that here next to close out the show. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at 5 Hour Energy. Caffeine just got a flavor upgrade. 5 Hour Energy shots deliver tasty caffeine in 17 bold flavors. Each 2-ounce shot packs the caffeine of a premium 12-ounce cup of coffee, plus B vitamins and nutrients with zero sugar and zero crashes. What I love most is how portable they are. Big taste in a tiny shot. You can take it anywhere and get the boost when you need it. There are tons of delicious flavors you can select as well. And it kicks in super fast. Plus, they're sugar-free. So you have to worry about a sugar crash later. That's not something you got to worry about with 5 Hour Energy at all. Enough with boring, flavorless caffeine. It's time to give your caffeine a flavor upgrade with 5 Hour Energy shots. Get the favorites you love, or be bold and try something new in-store and online at www.5hourenergy.com or Amazon today. All right, we talked about Malcolm Brogdon a little bit ago, and I want to just kind of, I guess, put a bow on that. Brogdon was somebody I targeted way back in June as somebody that I wanted Minnesota to go after. Somebody who is a true combo guard. I know he's like almost 3 years now removed from being like a legit good player, but remember, he was 6th man of the year in Boston just a few years ago. And injuries the last couple of years, playing a non-competitive teams, Portland, Washington. There wasn't a whole lot of reason for him to be on the court and pushing it when he was a little banged up and aging. What I liked about Brogdon is he could play both the two and initiate some offense as a point guard as well, and could give you a little bit of offensive upside, hopefully be steady defensively. Unfortunately, he signed with the Knicks, and so that's no longer on the table. I am kind of on the fence, honestly, about the idea of bringing in Malik Beasley. I deferred to my comments earlier about having a known quantity. Like, there's something to be said for that. There's something to be said for adding another elite 3-point shooter to Anthony Edwards, and then having the top 2 guys in 3-point attempts and makes last year on the team. That would be cool. That would be awesome. It would be effective offensively. Now, Malik doesn't play defense, and there would be some, like, there's a very specific role he plays, and while it's helpful that it's a known quantity, he's not a versatile piece, right? Like Dante DiVincenzo, Nicky Alexander-Walker was somebody who could do multiple things: play off the ball, catch and shoot, initiate a little bit of their own offense, create for others. Like, Malik Beasley's not doing that. He's just catching and shooting and being a poor defender. Like, that's what he's all about. But he's such a good shooter that there's value there. So I'm intrigued by the idea of bringing him in on a vet minimum plus contract. And obviously there's other teams interested in, and the Pistons can pay him more than anybody else. So once the legal stuff gets sorted out with him, or I should say the league's investigation, I don't believe he's the target anymore of the federal investigation related to gambling. There could be some punishment handed down by the NBA yet as well. But anyway, I think I would be interested in Beasley. Beyond that, like, there's not a whole lot else out there that really stands out to me. Now, the Wolves reportedly, have been close to bringing Bones Highland back in one of those final 2 roster spots. Remember, they do have 2 spots available. I think they'll only fill one, which has kind of been what they've been doing over the last couple of years under Tim Conley. And it sure does seem like Bones Highland might have the inside track on that roster spot. So we'll continue to keep an eye on that. We're like 2 weeks away now from training camp, so I would imagine we start to hear something here at some point pretty soon. But a shame that Brogdon went to the Knicks. I should say, and I mentioned this earlier, but the Knicks were one of the teams reportedly interested in Beasley. If Brogdon's there, likely the Knicks are off the board as a potential suitor for Beasley. So it's the Pistons, and I think there was one other team that had reported interest beyond the Wolves and the Pistons in Michael Beasley. No, not Michael Beasley, Malik Beasley. So many former offensive-minded Timberwolves players named Beasley, I guess. All right. So the Iowa Wolves have named their head coach, or the Timberwolves have named the head coach of the Iowa Wolves. We mentioned that this was reported a couple of weeks ago, but it is now official. Mahmoud Abdel Fattah is the new head coach of the Iowa Wolves. Abdel Fattah, he previously coached the Sydney Kings in Australia. And before that, he spent 4 seasons with the Rockets, coached their G League team for a couple of years, and was an assistant on the Rocket staff in 22-23. So good NBA experience. And good international experience, good G League experience, etc. He actually was an assistant coach at St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, and was on the basketball team that went to the Division II Final Four. So that is interesting. I didn't know that connection before when this was reported. So he certainly had success as a coach, and somebody that the Wolves front office brass is, at least on some level, obviously familiar with. And we'll see how the Iowa Wolves do this year. It should be an intriguing season for them. I would imagine Rocco Zikarsky and Jean Beringer each get a lot of time to play in Iowa. So I think a lot of folks are going to be tuning into those games on YouTube and following along as we get into the fall. Obviously, training camp comes first, and so Abdel Fattah, most likely, I would imagine, is involved in the Timberwolves training camp. We get to see those guys perhaps playing NBA preseason games as well. All right. So I got for you today here on the show. Of course, we're back to daily. We were last week, and then, of course, this week as well. Monday through Friday, every day. Get your Timberwolves fix here at Locked On Wolves. We'll get you ready for training camp and the start of the season. Launching into the player preview series here probably later this week as we gear up for training camp within the next couple of weeks. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. A reminder that the Locked On NBA Top 100 is here, voted on by the NBA hosts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Our Top 100 was formed by experts that cover every team and each player every day. Find the full list on Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Don't miss all my reaction to the Top 100 list. I talked about where all the Wolves players placed, compared them to each other, compared them to other contenders, dissected it really at least in one segment every day last week. So go listen to each show last week to learn more about the NBA Top 100, the Locked On NBA Top 100, and the Wolves players on that list. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is also part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.